Excel Language School. A real passion for learning.
Hi, I'm David, and here's another video from the Excel Language School about writing. In the last videos, I talked about writing Task 1 essays, and today I'd like to talk a little bit about writing Task 2 essays, right? Now, you may remember Task 1 essay is to write about a chart or a graph, but a Task 2 essay is you get a statement, and often you have to say if you agree or disagree and explain why. Now, many of my Vietnamese students have experience doing writing like this in Vietnamese, but it's a challenge to do it in a foreign language, and not all of the tactics and strategies in writing that are considered correct in Vietnamese school are considered correct in English school. So that's the challenge facing my Vietnamese students, to adapt their knowledge to the new language. So just to repeat some information that you may know, the Task 2 is the longer of the two essays. It should be about 250 words. It counts for 2/3 of your score. So it is recommended that you use 2/3 of the time that you have to write this, which is about 40 minutes. So recently in my Wednesday evening writing class, I developed a topic. I did several classes on the same topic, which was food trucks. Now, in case you don't know what a food truck is, here's a picture of a food truck. Food trucks are very popular in the USA. And here in Hanoi, I know there are a few food trucks, but maybe not as many as back where I come from. So if you want to know more, some of my students told me that they know about food trucks because there are some television shows about food trucks and reality programs where people have food trucks in them. And so if you look on TV, you might be able to get more of an idea about what food trucks are all about. But for my class, I had the students prepare for this essay by reading a short news article about food trucks. And the article was about some economic issues involving food trucks, specifically that people who own traditional restaurants in American cities, that is, restaurants that are in buildings and do not move, they are complaining about food trucks because food trucks will pull up in front of their restaurant on the street and sometimes take their customers away. So these owners of food trucks said, these owners of traditional restaurants were saying that food trucks were taking away their business. And some American cities listen to these owners and are protecting traditional restaurants, and some of them are just welcoming food trucks. And so there's a big difference between the atmosphere in American cities. And after we did this preparation, I gave the students the question, which is, city governments should protect traditional restaurants from competition from food trucks. To what extent do you agree or disagree? Write 250 words. And so in this case, the student wrote an essay, and I gave the student a band score of band 6 because I thought her essay was a little short. But generally, the student used good grammar and vocabulary, and I told her that if she can produce more writing, longer writing of the same quality, there is really no reason why she couldn't get band 6.5 or perhaps even band 7. Okay, so let's look at the first paragraph, which starts with the word nowadays. Now, this is a word nowadays that my Vietnamese students really like. I think maybe their Vietnamese teachers told them to use it. It's okay. It's only one word, and it's better than some other phrases that sometimes my Vietnamese students like to use, like in these modern times. But I tell students that many times words like nowadays or in these modern times, they don't add anything. And so you can just omit these words completely, because when you are writing IELTS, every word should be important. There shouldn't be any words that you can completely remove without a change in meaning. So instead of using a word like nowadays or a phrase like in these modern times, I often suggest that a student write their first sentence and show that they can use the present perfect. Why? Because the present perfect has the same function as nowadays. It shows past activity with present result. But also, you can show the reader, who is the grader of your essay, that you know how to use present perfect correctly. Okay, and in the second sentence, the student writes, some people say food trucks would harm the traditional restaurants. Now, you will see I suggested that the student, instead of using the word would, use the word might. And I tell students, use that word would only when you're talking about unreal situations, that is, things that are not true. Like, for example, if Vietnam were near the North Pole, it would be colder. Now, Vietnam is not near the North Pole, so Vietnam is hot. So that's when you use a modal verb like would. If you're going to talk about something that you don't know whether it's going to happen, I suggest might is the word you should go with. And let's move on to the second paragraph. And the second paragraph starts with the word firstly. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is handwriting. Now, today we hardly ever write anything by hand. I don't write anything by hand. Most of my writing is done on the computer. But for IELTS, you have to do it by hand, and so you have to concentrate on your handwriting. Now, in this case, the student's handwriting is actually pretty good, clear, and readable, but there are some problems. Like in this case, you will see the student uses the letter F, small f, and small t in the word food truck, and then the small f and the small t look almost the same. The student doesn't make them look any different. Now, in this case, it is clear, we all know what the student means, but you want to be able to make all of your letters look different and pay attention to those details when you're writing by hand. And in the third line of the same paragraph, the student uses an example of very good vocabulary, I think. Student uses the word sufficient capital, and that phrase, sufficient capital, has the same meaning as enough money. But enough money is really band score 5 or 6 vocabulary, and sufficient capital is an example of band 6 or 7 vocabulary. It says the same thing, but the vocabulary is more sophisticated. And so when students are asking me, how can I get a higher band score? I say, concentrate on knowing how to say the same ideas, but use more sophisticated vocabulary, like the student did in this case. Now, on the same line, you will see that the student misspelled an adjective phrase, bricks and mortar. Bricks and mortar. Now, this was an idiom that I actually taught in the class, and it's a very popular idiom nowadays, used in newspapers and magazine articles. And for example, here is a picture of bricks and mortar, right? Okay, and you see there, it's like a wall, and there are the red things are bricks, red bricks, and white mortar. But in this idiom, when you use this phrase, it means a physical store or a restaurant that you can walk into. So, for example, Amazon.com is an online store, but Big C or Metro or Lotte is a bricks and mortar store. It is actually a store you can walk into and look at the products, right? And so, just to make sure the example is clear, KFC is a bricks and mortar restaurant, but a food truck is not a bricks and mortar restaurant. Okay, and the next sentence is clear and grammatically correct, but it repeats the same information as in the previous sentence. And so that is not an enormous mistake, but try not to repeat information, right? Say information once and then move on. So, and the next sentence, the student uses the structure not only blah, 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 but also blah, blah, blah. And the student uses it correctly, and that's a good structure to get to know and to get to use. The grammar of it can be very tricky, so you want to be able to review it and know you can use it correctly before you use it in your Task 2 essay. And so at the end of the paragraph, the student writes, thirsty for making money, which is a good thing to write. The student's meaning is 100% clear, but the idiom has a little problem, especially that the student misspelled the word thirsty. It's spelled with an I, and the student used the U. And I gave the student an example of higher level vocabulary that she might be able to use to make the same point, and I suggested in this case she could use the word ambitious. Okay, let's move on to the next paragraph, and you see this paragraph starts with the word secondly, and so I think that's a good choice. It's a structural decision that the student made. She has 2 paragraphs about why food trucks are a good thing. The first one starts firstly, the second one starts secondly, right? And these show the reader that these 2 paragraphs are from the same point of view and will make the same argument, that is, that food trucks are a positive development. Okay, and on the second line, the student writes, quote, busy people such as students and officers, end quote. Now, when the student wrote the word officers, I think that she used this word incorrectly. Now, here's a picture of some officers. For example, this is a picture of police officers, and this is a picture of military officers. But I think the student wanted to write about people like this. They work in an office, but we don't call them officers. Instead, we call them office workers, right? So you could use office workers instead of officers in this case, or you could use higher level vocabulary for a higher band score. And in this case, you could use an idiom that we use in English. You call them white-collar workers, right? If you don't know what a white-collar worker is and a blue-collar worker is, you may want to study this idiom. It could be very useful. Okay, so the last line of the same paragraph, the student writes, instead of going to a restaurant, comma, waiting for a waitress, right? This is a frequent mistake of the Vietnamese students. In Vietnamese, you can connect these 2 phrases with a comma, but in English, in a situation like this, a comma doesn't work. You cannot connect them with a comma. You have to use the word and. So the student should have wrote going to a restaurant and waiting for a waitress. Okay, and on the last line of page 1, on the first page of the student's essay, the student writes, grab a tasty food. Food is a non-count mass noun, and so it does not use the indefinite article. When I say the indefinite article, I mean the word So knowing your count nouns and non-count nouns is something that is also very important for not making small grammar errors on your IELTS writing. Okay, and now we're moving on to the second page of the student's writing. And at the top of the second page, the student writes a few lines, and at the end of that paragraph, the student writes an asterisk. Now, in case maybe you don't know this word, this is a picture of an asterisk. It's a little star, right? And I believe the student put an asterisk in there because she decided after she wrote the next paragraph that she wanted to add a sentence to this paragraph. Now, when I'm teaching here at IELTS Language School, I don't mind if students do something like that, but I have to remind them that if they're actually taking the IELTS exam, they probably shouldn't do something like this, that is, put in an asterisk and then at the end of the essay write a line to be inserted into the middle. The possibility of misunderstanding between you and the grader is too great. So again, the student did this and I let her get away with it, but I advise very strongly, don't do this on an IELTS exam. Okay, and so the next paragraph starts with the words "yet food trucks" on the second line. In this sentence, after the word benefits, the student puts a punctuation mark, and this is another handwriting problem that sometimes I see. Student makes a mark, and it is not clear to me if the student means this mark to be a full stop or a comma. So when you're writing for the IELTS, make your punctuation clear, because your ability to use punctuation correctly is going to be part of your final grade. So in the last line, the student writes this influent, I-N-F-L-U-E-N-T, and that actually is not a word in English, right? And I believe that the student perhaps got confused because maybe they know the word fluent, like, you know, he is fluent in English, he speaks freely and easily, and then maybe they got mixed up because the correct word, it's both a verb and a noun, is influence with a C at the end. And this is an important and useful word and is often misspelled. So it's a good word to study for your IELTS writing. Okay, so in conclusion, I repeat, I gave this student a band score 6. Her writing was good, clear, easy to understand. Her handwriting is generally not a problem. However, I gave a lower score because really the student only developed one side of the argument, that is the argument for food trucks. She did not develop the argument against food trucks, and her conclusion was a little weak. It could have used another sentence or two. Now, I don't know what happened to the student, but I guess that the student started off strongly, and maybe the student wrote a little too slowly, and then she got towards the end and she found she didn't have enough time to make a really strong ending. And so, but this student is on the right road because she can produce very good English, and now all she needs to do is practice in her extra class and produce writing of the same quality, only just a little faster. And so that's a good reason to come here to the Excel Language School, because when you take extra classes, you do a lot of practice and you learn to produce language not only well, but under deadline pressure. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope to see you again on another video soon.
Excel Language School. A real passion for learning.